Adam's fire burns with vengeance. Centuries later, the Intergang, a ruthless mercenary group led by Ishmael Daher, is operating with impunity in Kandak, ostensibly searching for artifacts, but really just furthering their corporate control. They are hunting for the crown of Urz-Kandi, an object tied directly to Adam's past and the source of his power. Enter Adriana Tamaz, a passionate local archaeologist and activist, whose drive mirrors that of early Indiana Jones figures, minus the fedora, perhaps, but with an equal measure of stubborn pursuit of truth. She is determined to protect her homeland from exploitation. Adriana and her brother, Kareem, manage to locate the crown, but their success is instantly overshadowed by the arrival of the Intergang. In the ensuing confrontation, Kareem is killed, and in a moment of desperate grief and rage, Adriana accidentally activates the ancient prison containing Teth Adam. He rises, an imposing figure whose very presence feels like a disruption of the natural order. His first act is swift and brutally efficient, the immediate termination of the mercenaries surrounding Adriana. This isn't heroics as we usually see them. It's primal retribution. It's clear that Adam operates on a different moral compass than the heroes of the Justice Society of America, a team we soon meet, led by the pragmatic and always prepared Carter Hall, Hawkman. The arrival of the Justice Society, Hawkman, Dr. Fate, Cyclone, and Atom Smasher, serves as an immediate foil to Adam. They are the establishment of heroism, dedicated to order and careful application of force. Carter Hall, whose previous incarnations have spanned millennia, approaches Adam with the weary wisdom of someone who has seen civilizations rise and fall, understanding the cyclical nature of power. Kent Nelson, Dr. Fate, brings a mystical gravitas, his ancient helm of Nabu often serving as the voice of consequence and ancient law. Black Adam is, to them, an unacceptable variable, a walking apocalypse they are tasked with containing. The conflict quickly escalates from containment to full-blown confrontation. Adam views the society as naive meddlers protecting the status quo that allowed his people to suffer. His power is overwhelming. He moves with the speed and force of a freight train, reflecting Dwayne Johnson's own carefully cultivated screen persona built on unstoppable momentum. We see glimpses of his origin story through his eyes, particularly the agonizing memory of his son being murdered by the invaders, the event that truly triggered his ascent. The narrative cleverly weaves in the internal struggle of Amanda Waller, whose remote surveillance and tactical planning drive the world's reaction to meta-humans. She sees Adam not as a savior or a villain, but as a threat to global stability, a narrative choice that grounds the fantastical elements in modern geopolitical anxiety. The climax takes place amidst the chaos of the capital city, where the Intergang's leader, in a desperate move, unleashes an ancient demon, Sabak, a creature whose immense power rivals Adam's own, fueled by the same dark magic. This confrontation forces a reckoning. The Justice Society, initially focused on defeating Adam, realize that the greater threat is Sabak. It's a classic cinematic maneuver. The rogue element must briefly align with the established order to defeat a common, more catastrophic enemy. In the final, brutal battle, Adam finally sheds the pretense of restraint, fueled by the ghosts of his past, his son, his people. He fights with a ferocity that even frightens the heroes watching. It's Cyclone who offers a moment of understanding, recognizing the pain beneath the power, a fleeting empathy that cuts through the thunderous display of force. Eventually, Adam and the society, working in a tense, unspoken truce, manage to subdue Sabak. Yet, the resolution is not a simple embrace. Adam has done what was necessary to protect Kondak, but he has done so outside the rules. Dr. Fate ultimately steps in, not to kill Adam, but to force him into a form of protective custody, whisking him away. The ending leaves a lingering question. Is Teth Adam a necessary evil, a protector whose methods are too extreme? Or is he simply a force of nature that cannot be contained? The film closes on the understanding that while the immediate threat is gone, the legend of the Black Adam, the fierce, uncompromising champion of the oppressed, has only just begun. The weight of centuries hung about Teth Adam like a shroud, visible in the predatory stillness he adopted when assessing threats. His motivations weren't drawn from comic book ideals of altruism, but from the searing immediacy of remembered injustice. When he moved, it was with the economy of a predator that has learned the hard lesson that hesitation means death. Adriana Tomaz, the archaeologist, served as his unlikely anchor to the present, her own unwavering moral clarity a beacon against the darkness Adam carried. She saw not a monster, but a weapon pointed in the right general direction, a perspective perhaps informed by the tenacity required to excavate forgotten truths from layers of sand and political deceit. The introduction of the Justice Society felt less like a team-up and more like an intervention. Hawkman, in particular, embodied the disciplined warrior archetype, a man forever struggling to balance the weight of his past lives with the immediate demands of the present moment. His armor, gleaming under the Kondaki sun, represented a codified, almost bureaucratic approach to heroism that grated against Adam's raw kinetic energy. Then there was Dr. Fate, the vessel of Nabu, whose very presence was a metaphysical anchor. Kent Nelson's eyes, hidden behind the gold of the helm, suggested an immense, almost unbearable psychic fatigue, the burden of seeing every possible future and past confluence. Atom Smasher and Cyclone, the younger members, initially reacted with textbook fear and adherence to procedure, their youthful idealism sharply contrasted by Adam's battle-hardened cynicism. Cyclone, for all her superficial airiness, possessed an intuitive grasp of force and flow, quickly recognizing that Adam was a storm that couldn't simply be contained by handcuffs. What fascinated the observing world, particularly the cynical lens of Amanda Waller back in her operational centers, was Adam's refusal to conform to the archetype of the benevolent alien protector, the Superman analog. Adam was earthy, visceral, and deeply personal in his violence. He wasn't interested in rebuilding infrastructure. He was interested in ensuring no mercenary ever dared set foot on his soil again. This lack of political finesse made him dangerous to the global powers that preferred their champions predictable and controllable. The emergence of Sabak, summoned from the very depths of Kondak's magical history, was the narrative's necessary catalyst. Sabak was pure, unadulterated chaotic power, a mirror reflecting Adam's own destructive potential, only without the sliver of human connection Adriana represented. Fighting Sabak was not about morality. It was a contest of raw supremacy. It was in this fight that Adam's true ancient lineage asserted itself. The battle was less about strategy and more about sheer elemental force meeting elemental force. When Adam unleashed the full fury of the wizard's granted power, it was a spectacle of mythological proportions, terrifying in its scale, yet profoundly human in its origin, the defense of a place and a memory. The brief, necessary cooperation with the Justice Society felt tense, like wolves momentarily hunting alongside border collies. They respected the kill, but distrusted the hunter's methods. In the aftermath, Dr. Fate's decision to remove Adam was less a punishment and more a removal of a volatile element from a fragile ecosystem. It was a gesture acknowledging that while Adam was undeniably powerful, his existence perpetually threatened the world's established, albeit flawed, equilibrium. Adam allowed himself to be taken, perhaps out of weariness, or perhaps because even an ancient entity requires a pause before the next inevitable resurrection. His departure was a promise whispered on the desert wind. Kondak had a champion, and that champion would return when the sun next set on injustice. The silence that followed Dr. Fate's intervention was heavy, thick with the dust of the recent devastation and the unspoken acknowledgement of shared, terrible power. Teth Adam, standing amidst the wreckage, carried the aura of a force that had been briefly leashed, not truly defeated. His eyes, when they swept over the retreating figures of the Justice Society, held no remorse, only the distant calculation of a being who views millennia as mere moments. The emotional landscape he navigated was Spartan. Duty to his people, retribution for his past, and a profound isolation born from outliving every bond. Adriana Tomaz watched this final scene with a complex mixture of awe and disquiet. She was the scholar who unearthed the legend, only to be confronted by the terrifying reality of its execution. Her idealism, which began as a bright flame seeking historical preservation, had been tempered by the fire of Adam's vengeance. She understood, perhaps better than the seasoned heroes, that Adam's brutality was a direct, proportional response to the unimaginable brutality inflicted upon him centuries prior. It was the delayed, violent amortization of a debt. This relationship, born of shared peril, was fundamentally asymmetrical. She sought to integrate him into a world of rules, while he existed outside of them entirely. Carter Hall, Hawkman, perhaps understood this isolation most intimately. Having lived countless lives defined by duty and violent ends, he recognized the eternal burden of the warrior who must make decisions others cannot stomach. Yet, the sheer magnitude of Adam's power, an inherent, unrestrained godhood, was something even the reincarnated Prince of Thebes found alarming. It wasn't just that Adam broke rules. Adam seemed to operate on a different plane of causality, where the rules of civilized engagement were irrelevant. This fundamental difference prevented any true camaraderie, leaving only a professional, wary respect based on mutual survival against Sabak. Amanda Waller's perspective, relayed through cold, disembodied transmissions, remained pragmatic. To her, Black Adam was the ultimate example of unregulated power exceeding acceptable risk parameters. She admired efficiency, but Adam's methods were too loud, too disruptive to the delicate tapestry of international relations she sought to maintain. He was a loose thread that could unravel the entire geopolitical fabric she worked so hard to keep taut. The return to the desert was inevitable, a symbolic reclaiming of his domain. Teth Adam did not flee. He simply ceased to engage with the established world once the immediate threat was neutralized. The residual magic clinging to him was not the polished, contained energy of Dr. Fate, but something raw, like volcanic residue, a power that hinted at the cataclysmic potential that slumbered just beneath the surface. He had shown the world that true justice, when extracted by the oppressed, looks less like mediation and more like seismic rearrangement. The narrative closed not on peace, but on a vigilant, armed quiet. The understanding that the protector of Kondak was now fully awake, and the world would forever have to calculate his terrifying presence into its balance of power. The quiet that settled over Kondak was the silence before the next storm, not the tranquility of resolution. Teth Adam, now fully restored to his ancestral lands, found the reintegration difficult, not because of the people's fear, but because the external battle had ended, forcing him to face the internal war. His energy, once channeled entirely into the external threats of the Intergang and Sabak, began to refract inward. He had saved them, yet he remained an outsider, a living embodiment of a past too violent for their fragile present. Adriana Tomaz became the bridge, ceaselessly working to translate the necessity of his power into a language the world, and perhaps Adam himself, could process. Her empathy wasn't blind adoration. It was the archaeologist's dedication to understanding the artifact in its entirety, its beauty, its danger, and its context. She understood that while the wizard had intended him as a champion, the centuries of suffering had molded him into something closer to a natural disaster, albeit one devoted to their cause. She often found him observing the horizon, his gaze fixed not on the immediate threats, but on the slow, grinding progress of daily life, a life he felt irrevocably separated from. Back in the shadows of global governance, Amanda Waller initiated Project Cadmus protocols, now repurposed. Her focus shifted from containment to cataloging, and, implicitly, neutralizing. She understood that Adam's greatest strength, his unyielding loyalty to Kondak, was also his greatest vulnerability, a single point of leverage. Waller's methodology, honed over years managing unpredictable assets like Task Force X, dictated that even heroes must have contingency plans. The Justice Society, meanwhile, retreated, their faith in their own established moral framework severely tested. They had witnessed power they could barely comprehend, and the lines between their prescribed heroism and Adam's effective, brutal guardianship had blurred irreparably. Carter Hall, in particular, felt the sting of their operational failure. They had arrived with doctrine and discipline, only to be overshadowed by primal, necessary force. The local populace, while grateful, began to treat Adam with a reverence that bordered on terror. He was their miracle, but miracles are rarely comfortable roommates. They saw the protector, but they also saw the shadow of the man who murdered without hesitation. This subtle shift in perception began to form a new kind of cage around Adam, the cage of expectation. If he showed restraint, they feared he would fail them again. If he used his full power, they feared he would consume them along with their enemies. This psychological pressure was a subtler, yet more insidious form of slavery than the physical chains he'd worn centuries ago. Teth Adam, The man who had finally broken free of external bondage now wrestled with the invisible bonds woven by gratitude and fear. His eternal vigil was shifting from guarding borders to guarding his own soul against the corrupting influence of absolute, unchecked response. The atmosphere in Kondak became thick with a tension that permeated the very architecture of their rebuilt hope. Teth Adam, perpetually restless, found solace only in patrolling the borders, the physical expanse serving as a buffer against the suffocating scrutiny of his own people and the lingering ghosts of his past. He carried the wizard's gift, but it felt less like a blessing and more like a permanent, blazing fever. His movements were now less about explosive retribution and more about a coiled readiness, a constant demonstration of capability meant to preempt any future challenge before it could even fully form in the minds of adversaries. Adriana, observing this intense solitude, recognized the historical parallel to the myth of the solitary king, the one who must stand apart to command respect, yet ultimately starves for true companionship. She often brought him reports, not just of archaeological findings or intergang remnants, but details of daily life, a successful harvest, a dispute settled peacefully, small victories of normalcy she desperately hoped would ground him. These mundane details seemed to bounce off the hardened shell of his experience. Yet she persisted, driven by the belief that true salvation wasn't just the absence of oppressors, but the presence of sustainable peace. Meanwhile, the machinations of the global intelligence community continued to hum. Amanda Waller, ever the student of human behavior under duress, began correlating Adam's presence with an unnerving drop in regional terrorist activity. This presented her with a profound ideological conundrum. The most effective guardian of stability was also the greatest threat to the system designed to maintain that stability. She started subtly funding counter-narratives in international media, framing Black Adam not as a national protector, but as a sovereign threat, an unstable nuclear deterrent operating without oversight. Her inspirations, drawn from Cold War containment strategies, suggested that isolating the anomaly was always preferable to engaging it directly, especially when that anomaly could casually swat away conventional military force. The Justice Society, licking their wounds and re-evaluating their mandate, found themselves in an uncomfortable ideological schism. Hawkman argued for a diplomatic approach, a recognition that their previous reliance on established procedure had left a massive power vacuum that Adam had violently filled. Dr. Fate, however, remained deeply concerned. He could perceive the growing mystical resonance around Kondak, an energy signature that suggested Adam was not just powerful, but was slowly beginning to draw upon the very ley lines of the earth, shifting the metaphysical balance. This was not the localized power the wizard had intended. It was something larger, something drawing from the deepest reservoirs of ancient magic, perhaps even rivaling the power source of Nabu himself. The unspoken fear was that Adam, in defending his home, was inadvertently preparing for a global magical confrontation, a conflict the JSA was woefully unprepared to arbitrate or survive. The quiet in Kondak was simply the calm before the larger, world-spanning storm Adam's very existence seemed to promise. The The deepening isolation of Teth Adam manifested in subtle but telling shifts in his demeanor. His posture, once rigidly defensive, now carried a heavier, almost bored gravitas, as if the effort of merely existing in the world of mere mortals was taxing his ancient patience. The legends whispered about him in the surrounding nations were growing louder, morphing from tales of a fierce liberator to cautionary fables about an unpredictable deity. This shift in perception was exactly what Waller's silent campaign was designed to achieve, to paint him as an existential danger, not a local sovereign. Adriana, witnessing this slow calcification of his humanity, grew more desperate to keep the channels of communication open. She saw Adam spending increasing amounts of time near the ancient resting places of Kandak's forgotten kings, perhaps communing with the spirits of the lineage he now implicitly represented. She felt the weight of her own small role. She was the only one willing to speak the truth to power, even when that power was carved from granite and lightning. Her commitment was the antithesis of the JSA's detachment. Where they saw a tactical problem to be contained, she saw a wounded soul burdened with impossible responsibility. The Justice Society's internal debate became a microcosm of the global divide on metahuman governance. Cyclone and Atom Smasher, still recovering from the sheer shockwave of the Sabak fight, leaned towards understanding, finding Adam's raw defense compelling, even if his methods were abhorrent to their training. They represented the emerging generation of heroes, grappling with the limits of idealism. Conversely, Hawkman clung fiercely to the established order. He saw Adam's continued presence as a direct challenge to the very concept of global policing, a precedent that could unravel decades of hard-won treaties regarding metahuman interaction. His own history, steeped in cyclical conflict and the necessary compromise of empires, made him inherently suspicious of any power that operated without external checks. Dr. Fate, meanwhile, retreated further into the Council of Nabu, his pronouncements becoming cryptic and fraught with portent. He perceived the magic Adam was now subconsciously drawing upon as an elemental force, indifferent to morality, an energy source that responded only to will and need. Fate worried less about Adam's intentions and more about the inevitable, destabilizing feedback loop created by injecting such raw power into the world's nervous system. He viewed Adam as a walking magical singularity, destined to eventually collapse under its own unsustainable density. Teth Adam, in his quiet moments, often revisited the last living image of his son, not the moment of murder, which was too sharp, but the brief instant before, when the child looked up at him with uncomplicated trust. This memory was the final, agonizing tether to his humanity, the fuel that kept his vengeance from becoming pure, aimless nihilism. He was a sentinel standing guard over a phantom, an ancestor fighting for a future that might never fully appreciate the cost. He understood that the world had deemed him dangerous, and in a strange, perverse way, he agreed with their assessment. But he also understood that the world was fundamentally unprepared for the dangers that lay beyond their fragile treaties and surveillance screens, dangers that only a god forged in slavery could effectively confront. The stage was set not for an alliance, but for an inevitable, tragic collision between necessary evil and necessary order. The simmering tension between Kandak's fierce protector and the rest of the world began to boil over through proxy conflicts. Waller's subtle information warfare proved highly effective. Neighboring nations, nervous about the sudden emergence of an unaligned, immensely powerful entity on their border, began mobilizing forces under the guise of security exercises. They were not directly attacking Adam, but the constant probing, the border skirmishes instigated by mercenaries quietly funded by external powers, served to keep Teth Adam perpetually on edge, constantly expending the energy of vigilance. He was trapped in a cycle. Any aggressive response, no matter how proportional, was instantly weaponized by Waller's network as proof of his inherent tyranny. Adriana found herself caught in the middle, her earnest efforts to establish humanitarian corridors and secure international recognition for Kandak's sovereignty, constantly undermined by manufactured crises. She often argued passionately with local council members who, swayed by international fear-mongering, suggested that perhaps Adam needed to temper his visibility. This request struck Adam like a physical blow. To temper his visibility was to invite renewed subjugation. His response was measured but devastatingly final. He publicly, unambiguously declared that any hostile incursion into Kandaki airspace or territory would be met with immediate, overwhelming force, regardless of the flag flying over the attacking vessel. This declaration was the gauntlet thrown down before the Justice Society. Carter Hall perceived it as an unacceptable escalation toward open war. He reached out one final time, a desperate plea channeled through fate's ethereal connection, attempting to appeal to the remnants of the man he sensed beneath the godlike shell. Hall spoke not of laws, but of legacy. He argued that true immortality came not from ruling through fear, but from inspiring change through controlled, righteous action, a philosophy Hall had painfully learned through his own endless cycles of rebirth and conflict. Adam listened, unmoved. Legacy, to Adam, was defined by the concrete reality of safety for his living people, not abstract concepts debated in distant council chambers. Dr. Fate's involvement deepened as he perceived a dangerous convergence. The latent energy Adam was attracting wasn't merely magical. It was historical resonance, the very fabric of ancient vengeance clinging to him. Fate saw visions where Adam, in his defense of Kondak, unwittingly opened pathways for other, older, darker entities long sealed away by the wizard. The protective shell around Kondak was becoming a beacon for the supernatural underworld. This understanding gave fate a newfound urgency. Keeping Adam isolated was not just a diplomatic necessity, but a cosmic imperative to prevent a magical catastrophe that would make Sabak look like a petty skirmish. The lines blurred further. The JSA now feared that containing Adam might inadvertently be the key to saving the world from the greater forces his presence was attracting. The next confrontation, it was clear, would not be about jurisdiction, but about mutual magical survival. The air above Kondak shimmered with latent power, a visual manifestation of Teth Adam's sustained vigilance. He no longer seemed to inhabit the world so much as command it to remain still around him. This tension finally snapped when a small, highly specialized drone reconnaissance unit, clearly operating under Waller's intelligence, but flying under the banner of a neighboring nervous state, ventured too close to the capital's heavily fortified perimeter. Adam didn't bother with warnings. The drone simply ceased to exist, vaporized in a silent burst of pure energy, leaving behind only ionized air. This calculated annihilation was a direct challenge to the Justice Society's already strained authority. Hawkman felt the public humiliation acutely, seeing it as the failure of every ethical framework they championed. He viewed Adam's actions as a regression to barbarism, a power unrestrained by the social contract. For Carter Hall, whose entire existence was dedicated to honoring past failures through disciplined present action, Adam represented everything that leads to the downfall of civilizations, unchecked ego masked as necessity. Adriana, however, saw the tactical brilliance hidden within the aggression. She understood that in the current geopolitical climate, only a show of absolute, instantaneous consequence would keep the manufactured border tensions at bay. She argued to the JSA envoy, a message relayed through tense, encrypted channels, that Adam was employing the only language the global powers truly respected: absolute deterrence. She painted Adam as a high-yield defensive weapon, whose occasional discharge was preferable to the prolonged agony of siege warfare. This view resonated uncomfortably with Adam Smasher and Cyclone, who had seen the raw efficacy of his power firsthand. Dr. Fate, burdened by apocalyptic foresight, acted decisively. He perceived that Adam was evolving. The ancient magic was integrating with the physical, allowing him to draw strength from the very land of Kondak in a way that contradicted the wizard's initial instructions for the champion's use. Fate realized that the power given to Adam was corrupting the planet's mystic balance. To prevent a total magical cascade, Fate made the unilateral decision that Adam needed to be severed from his power source, a dangerous undertaking that required more than simple containment. The ensuing confrontation was deeply personal, taking place just outside the ancient tombs where Adam often sought his lonely counsel. It was less a battle and more a metaphysical siege. Fate did not fight Adam with brute force, but with binding enchantments drawn from the deep well of Nabu's wisdom. Spells designed to sever the connection between the man and the lightning. Adam fought back with raw fury, lashing out not just at fate, but at the memory of the wizard who had failed to foresee the ensuing centuries of pain. The climax of this encounter involved fate managing to momentarily shunt Adam into a pocket dimension, a place of pure temporal stagnation, effectively freezing him outside the timeline to give the JSA time to strategize a permanent solution that didn't involve killing their only chance at true regional stability. Adam was gone, suspended, leaving behind a charged silence and a world momentarily paused, unsure if its terrifying guardian had been vanquished or merely momentarily delayed. The sudden temporal stasis imposed upon Teth Adam left an unnatural void in Kondak, a vacuum filled instantly by the world's returning anxieties. The pocket dimension fate thrust him into was a quiet hell, a place where time stretched infinitely thin, allowing Adam countless subjective eternities to replay the precise moments of his failure, his grief, and the wizard's ultimate betrayal. He was not unconscious. He was simply disconnected, experiencing the full agonizing weight of every second he had ever lived, every life he had ended, all at once. This was perhaps the cruelest form of imprisonment, as it forced the man who moved with unstoppable speed to confront absolute stillness. Adriana Tomaz felt the absence of his presence like a physical amputation. The strategic deterrence his sheer existence provided was gone, and the international powers, sensing weakness, immediately increased the pressure. Propaganda machines, lubricated by Waller's funding, went into overdrive, painting Adam's disappearance as an admission of guilt, or, worse, a sign that he had abandoned his people. Adriana knew this was the moment she had to step forward from the shadows of the academic world and into the harsh light of leadership. She began organizing massive public demonstrations, not just of loyalty to Adam, but of Kandaki self-reliance, knowing that survival now depended on projecting an image of unified defiance even in the absence of their godlike champion. The Justice Society, now holding the volatile key to Adam's existence, fractured further over the ethical ramifications of fate's extreme intervention. Carter Hall was deeply uneasy. To imprison a willing protector indefinitely felt dangerously close to the tyranny they fought against. He argued that fate had overstepped, transforming the JSA from arbiters of justice to jailers of necessary force. Cyclone and Atom Smasher sided with Hall, pointing out that Adam's immediate, singular focus on Kondak was arguably the most stable factor in the region. Their frustration highlighted the fundamental flaw in the JSA's structure. They were designed to fight villains, not to manage complex geopolitical conflicts involving morally gray champions. Kent Nelson, as Dr. Fate, bore the psychic toll of maintaining the temporal prison. The helm of Nabu showed him the inevitable consequences. Keeping Adam bound was only delaying the necessary confrontation, while simultaneously allowing the darker mystical currents he had detected to coalesce unchecked around the now vulnerable Kondak. He saw that Adam's power, though dangerous, was also acting as a magical dam, and removing the dam without replacing it only guaranteed a flood. His commitment to fate's law was absolute, but the human cost weighed heavily on the soul of Kent Nelson. Waller, ever the opportunist, watched the internal JSA conflict with predatory satisfaction. With Adam neutralized and the JSA divided, she quietly initiated the final phase of her plan. The deployment of specialized containment units, framed as international peacekeepers, designed not to fight Adam, but to occupy the territory he had secured. Her ambition was not merely to police the world, but to control the narrative surrounding power itself. The silence was deceptive. Beneath the surface, the chess pieces were being positioned for the ultimate contest, not between good and evil, but between order maintained by control and order maintained by absolute, terrifying strength. The world held its breath, waiting to see which side fate would ultimately choose, and what Teth Adam would do when the static imprisonment finally broke. The artificial stillness of the temporal bubble began to strain under the accumulated psychic pressure of Teth Adam's sustained consciousness. Inside the timeless void, Adam achieved a dreadful clarity. The memories of his son, once sharp daggers of pain, began to fuse with the knowledge of his present failure. He recognized the true nature of his imprisonment, not a physical lock, but a metaphysical muzzle placed upon the only entity capable of guaranteeing Kondak's survival. This realization ignited a cold, focused rage far more potent than the explosive fury he'd unleashed against the Intergang. He was done reacting. He was ready to impose his will. Outside, in the palpable reality, Adriana Tomaz fought a war of attrition against doubt and misinformation. She walked the streets of the capital, a defiant figure of mortal leadership, rallying the populace not to wait for their God, but to embody the strength he had shown them. Her speeches resonated with a raw, earned authority. She wasn't asking for faith. She was demanding self-respect. She knew that the moment Waller's forces moved in, the fragile political peace would shatter, and the necessity of Adam's return would become a self-evident truth, even to his enemies. The Justice Society's internal crisis reached its zenith. Carter Hall confronted Dr. Fate in a secluded sanctuary, the ancient Hawkman's voice tight with suppressed fury. "You have traded tyranny for stagnation, Kent. If we stop him because he is too effective, what does that make us?" Hall's argument hinged on the hypocrisy of maintaining flawed global systems by eliminating necessary extremes. Fate, his face grim beneath the golden mask, countered with the stark reality of cosmic balance. His power is not his own to wield freely. It is a parasite on the world's magic. My duty is not to politics, Carter, but to entropy. Adam's unchecked strength will tear the veil entirely. The argument was unresolved, leaving the JSA paralyzed by moral deadlock as Waller's containment units began their slow, methodical descent toward Kandaki borders under the guise of stabilizing the region post-Adam's disappearance. The breaking point came when the first of Waller's advance teams attempted to secure an ancient, magically significant energy nexus outside the city, a nexus that fate had warned was intrinsically linked to Adam's core power source. As the specialized troops, armored against any known metahuman threat, began their deployment, the temporal prison housing Teth Adam flickered violently. The sheer willpower exerted by Adam, fueled by the encroaching threat to his anchor, overwhelmed the delicate dimensional lock. In a flash of blinding ancient lightning that scorched the very air where he had been suspended, Black Adam was back. He materialized not gradually, but instantly, appearing directly above the encroaching invasion force, a roaring engine of retribution, finally uncaged. His return was not a quiet reemergence. It was a declaration of war against the pretenders to his realm. The war for Kandak, stalled by imprisonment, had just been reignited with divine fury. The reemergence of Teth Adam was not merely a return, it was an eruption. The raw power that flooded back into his being seemed to vibrate the very atmosphere, causing the high-tech containment gear of Waller's advancing mercenaries to sputter and fail momentarily. He hung in the air above the panicked soldiers, a silhouette against the desert sky, his expression a mask of absolute, perfected wrath. The subjective eons he spent trapped had stripped away any lingering uncertainty. He now understood that restraint was not just naive, it was suicidal. His vengeance was now a mandate. Adriana, witnessing the spectacle from the city walls, let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. This was the terrible protector she knew he was, magnificent and utterly terrifying. She knew her immediate role was to ensure the people did not scatter in fear, but instead saw this as the inevitable rallying point. She ordered the city defenses to stand down, a calculated risk signaling to the world that Kandak was no longer negotiating with outsiders. They were accepting the wrath of their champion. The Justice Society reacted with disarray. Dr. Fate immediately recognized the catastrophic failure of his containment spell, the energy feedback nearly overwhelming him. He saw that Adam had not merely broken free. He had metabolized the experience, emerging stronger and more attuned to the raw, magical architecture of the region. Hawkman, propelled by duty and a desperate need to reassert some form of ethical control, launched himself toward Adam, ignoring the chaotic signals from his team. "Adam, we need to talk, outside the fray." Hall's voice, amplified by his specialized gear, sounded thin against the gathering storm. Adam didn't engage Hawkman directly. Instead, he directed his attention to the source of the intrusion, the mercenary staging area. The confrontation was swift and brutally asymmetrical. Where the mercenaries relied on sophisticated weaponry and coordinated tactics, the hallmarks of modern military philosophy, Adam relied on the overwhelming force of ancient magic. He didn't use targeted blasts. He manipulated the kinetic energy in the air, creating localized pressure zones that crushed vehicles and threw armored soldiers like discarded toys. It was a demonstration of physics rewritten by divine fiat. Waller, viewing the feed from her command center, watched her contingency plan dissolve in real time. Her face remained impassive, but her internal assessment shifted dramatically. Her primary objective, controlling the region, was now secondary to the survival of her operational teams. She immediately issued withdrawal orders, classifying Adam's return as an unforeseen escalation, demanding global consultation, effectively passing the crisis up the geopolitical food chain and hoping to draw in larger, less specialized military responses that might bog Adam down through sheer numbers, if not superior technology. The final emotional beat of this sequence rested on fate. Recognizing the futility of another direct magical confrontation that might only further destabilize the world's magical matrix, Kent Nelson made a choice of immense sacrifice. He used the helm of Nabu not to bind Adam, but to project a massive, temporary shield around the city of Kahndaq itself. A final act of protection designed to absorb the collateral damage of the inevitable larger war that was now brewing. He funneled his own life force and Nabu's ancient power into this barrier, a grand, spectacular gesture that drained him almost to death, effectively conceding the immediate battlefield to Adam while buying the world a brief reprieve to prepare for the true, inevitable clash between sovereign power and global control. Adam stood victorious over the scattered remnants of the invasion. The Protector returned, but the cost of his freedom, and the deepening rift with the world's established order, was clearer than ever. The silence that followed Adam's incandescent return was not the silence of victory, but the charged quiet of a coiled spring finally released. The lingering scent of ozone and pulverized composite armor hung over the desert, a pungent perfume of successful defiance. Teth Adams surveyed the wreckage, not with triumph, but with the weary satisfaction of a physician who has just excised a virulent infection. The sheer ease with which he had dispatched Waller's forces had cemented a terrifying truth. Kahndaq was his, and the methods of its defense were no longer up for international debate. Adriana, standing near the perimeter shields fate had so generously, and perhaps fatally, erected, felt a complex surge of emotion. There was immense pride in seeing her people witness such unambiguous defense, but it was deeply mingled with dread. She looked at the golden glow fading from the horizon, where fate had expended himself, realizing that their greatest defender had just bought them time by sacrificing his own anchor to the present reality. Her immediate duty shifted from galvanizing public support to managing the impending geopolitical fallout, a task made infinitely harder by Adam's scorched earth approach to deterrence. She understood that while Adam had won the battle for the border, he had just handed Amanda Waller the moral high ground in the court of world opinion. Waller, viewing the tactical annihilation from her secure bunker, registered a flicker of something almost akin to professional awe, quickly suppressed. She hadn't just underestimated Adam's power. She had underestimated his resolve once his sovereignty was directly challenged. Her next move was calculated to leverage the global reaction, labeling the event an unprovoked act of magical terrorism, and leveraging the visible exhaustion of Dr. Fate as proof that the world's established heroes were simply too weak or too compromised to manage such entities. She began quietly preparing contingency plans for a multinational military coalition, not to invade Kondak, but to quarantine it, treating the entire nation as a hostile, magical singularity. For the remnants of the Justice Society, the event was a crisis of faith. Carter Hall was devastated by Fate's sacrifice and his own inability to bridge the gap with Adam. He saw Adam not as a villain, but as a profound, tragic mistake, a necessary weapon that had grown too powerful for its creators. He retreated to an ancient temple, seeking guidance from his own reincarnated memories, wrestling with the concept that perhaps some battles are won by refusing to fight on the enemy's terms, a lesson Adam exemplified through utter domination. Dr. Fate's sacrifice was profound. The physical Kent Nelson was barely clinging to consciousness, the golden helm inert, stripped of its immediate connection to Nabu's power. His spirit, however, was momentarily free of the helm's endless psychic static. In that brief, lucid window, he saw with perfect clarity the intricate, ancient tether that bound Adam to the Earth's deepest magical currents, the same currents that gave rise to gods and monsters alike. He understood that Adam wasn't just a man wielding power. He was becoming a conduit for an ancient, volatile global energy system. The problem was no longer Adam's intentions, but the inevitable destruction caused by the sheer volume of power passing through him. Fate's final, silent message, projected telepathically toward Adriana before his full collapse, was a single, desperate concept. The source must be severed, not contained. The battle for Kondak had ceased being a local affair. It was now a high-stakes magical intervention before Teth Adam inadvertently triggered a planetary magical collapse through sheer defensive necessity. The kinetic energy of Black Adam, particularly the version presented in the repack release, offers a fascinating case study in franchise building and the persistent challenge of translating comic book iconography to the screen with genuine thematic weight. Dwayne Johnson, the central gravitational force of this production, embodies Teth Adam with a physicality that seems less like acting and more like a necessary manifestation of the character's ancient power. His long-held passion project, finally reaching fruition, speaks volumes about the modern star system, where personal investment can drive a project for years, often against conventional studio wisdom. This deep connection to the material, rooted in his admitted childhood admiration for the anti-hero, is palpable, yet it simultaneously serves as both the film's greatest strength and its most significant constraint. The narrative thrust pivots on the classic struggle between absolute power and necessary restraint, a theme inherently tied to Black Adam's origins in Kahndaq. Unlike the clear moral architecture of Superman, Adam's journey is deliberately murkier, functioning as a brutal consequence of systemic oppression. The introduction of the Justice Society of America, JSA, serves as the primary catalyst for this moral conflict. Aldis Hodge's Hawkman, in particular, carries the burden of history, his grounded skepticism acting as the necessary counterweight to Adam's raw, untamed force. Hodge brings a measured gravitas to the role, reminiscent of the stoicism required by figures burdened by legacy, echoing the disciplined approach he demonstrated in roles like Leverage. The JSA's structure, featuring Dr. Fate, Cyclone, and Atom Smasher, is an attempt to establish a heroic bedrock within the DC universe, yet they often feel more like necessary foils than fully realized entities designed to challenge Adam's philosophical framework. Pierce Brosnan's Dr. Fate, a figure steeped in arcane knowledge, offers the most intriguing, mystical texture. Brosnan, whose career has long traded on a certain suave charisma established during his tenure as James Bond, shifts gears here, utilizing a more ethereal, commanding presence. His performance relies heavily on the visual spectacle of his magic, often serving as the narrative bridge between Adam's brute force and the JSA's conventional heroism. However, the film struggles to grant enough interiority to the JSA members. They function largely as plot mechanisms designed to react to Adam, rather than proactive agents pushing their own narrative. The visual language of the film is dominated by spectacle, a trademark of modern blockbuster filmmaking, yet it occasionally falters under the weight of excessive CGI dependency. The action sequences involving Black Adam are visceral, emphasizing the sheer destructive capability of the wizard Shazam's gifts when wielded without inhibition. This contrasts sharply with the more stylized, almost balletic fights often associated with established DC heroes. The film seems to actively invite comparison with its cinematic predecessor, Shazam, but rather than forging a clear path forward, it often feels like a direct, darker response, perhaps overcompensating for the lighter tone of that film. The core thematic exploration revolves around vengeance versus justice, framed through the lens of colonial resentment. Kahndaq is not merely a setting. It is the wound that fuels Adam. His transformation is not a heroic ascent, but a response to unbearable trauma, a point the film hammers home repeatedly. This dedication to the anti-hero archetype is commendable, yet the final resolution often pulls back from the true implications of that darkness. For a character positioned as the ultimate consequence of unchecked power, the climax requires a significant moral softening to align with franchise expectations, a structural compromise that lessens the impact of the preceding 2 hours of uncompromising rage. Ultimately, Black Adam succeeds as a showcase for its leading man and a demonstration of the potential for a more ruthless power dynamic in a shared cinematic world, even if it ultimately hesitates to fully embrace the chaotic, ambiguous nature its title character promises. The emotional landscape of Black Adam is fundamentally shaped by the juxtaposition of Johnson's monolithic presence against the backdrop of ancient suffering. His portrayal is less about internal monologue and more about externalized, simmering fury, a quiet intensity that occasionally breaks into earth-shattering displays of dominance. This calculated restraint, which defines the opening act, is what makes his eventual rampage so cathartic for the character, if perhaps unsettling for the audience expecting a conventional hero's arc. Johnson often draws from the well of sheer, unadulterated willpower that propelled him from wrestling superstardom to global box office king. Here, that sheer force of will is channeled into Teth Adams' refusal to submit to any authority, be it the JSA or the memory of his past tormentors. The dynamics within the JSA, while serving their narrative purpose as oppositional forces, often feel underdeveloped, functioning as reactive mirrors rather than distinct personalities. Noah Centineo's Atom Smasher, embodying youthful exuberance and a desire to live up to a legacy, provides necessary levity, a stark contrast to Adam's grim focus. His growth, such as it is, centers on learning humility in the face of overwhelming might. Similarly, Quintessa Swindell's Cyclone is presented as a character deeply aware of the precarious balance between power and consequence. Yet her primary function seems to be illustrating the collateral damage inherent in Adam's battles. They are heroes defined by their relationship to Adam's shadow. The film's commitment to its grim prologue, the sequence detailing the loss of Adam's family and the subsequent enslavement of Kondak, is critical. It establishes the stakes not in terms of global catastrophe, but in deeply personal, generational trauma. This is where the film strives to emulate the anti-hero narratives that have dominated recent cinematic explorations of morality, suggesting that true justice, born from pain, often looks indistinguishable from vengeance. Director Jean Collet-Serra, whose previous work often involved stylish, heightened realism in thrillers like The Shallows, applies a large-scale visual grammar here, emphasizing weight and impact, ensuring every punch lands with cinematic gravity, echoing the grounded severity he brought to lesser-known properties before being entrusted with this behemoth. However, the introduction of the true antagonist, something rooted in the ancient evil of Kondak, serves as the narrative's safety net. By presenting a larger, more monstrous evil, the film allows Black Adam to pivot from being an antagonist to a necessary, albeit brutal, protector. This transition is perhaps the most telling aspect of the studio's approach. The desire to build a viable cinematic universe mandates that the disruptive force, no matter how compelling its reasons, must eventually align itself, even temporarily, with the established heroic paradigm. The film teases true anarchy, but settles for highly effective, localized vigilante justice. The lingering sense of ambiguity that fans hoped for, the true, unredeemable anti-hero, is ultimately sacrificed at the altar of future, interconnected storytelling, leaving a powerful figure constrained by the need to eventually share the stage. The visual realization of Kondak itself is one of the film's less explored emotional territories. It is painted as a land perpetually under duress, its ancient architecture juxtaposed with brutal modern occupation, creating a tangible sense of suppressed spirit. This environment is crucial because it frames Black Adam's return not as an invasion, but as a liberation, albeit one enacted with terrifying, indiscriminate force. The emotional weight carried by the few supporting Kandaki characters who recognize and revere Adam, chiefly Adriana Tomaz, played by Sarah Shahi, is meant to be the audience's conduit to understanding his righteousness. Shahi delivers a performance centered on fierce loyalty and desperate hope, positioning her as the moral compass, attempting to guide the ancient warrior toward focused protection rather than indiscriminate retribution. Her belief system is what allows the audience to rationalize Adam's extreme methods. She sees the liberator where the JSA sees only a weapon of mass destruction. The conflict between Adam and Hawkman becomes a philosophical duel fought with fists and conviction. Hodge imbues Hawkman with the weary wisdom of someone who has witnessed cycles of chaos before. His dialogue often stresses the importance of rules and limitations, learned through costly historical mistakes, directly challenging Adam's belief that means always justify the end, when that end is freedom. This dynamic is far more compelling than the numerous CGI skirmishes, as it forces both sides to articulate their worldviews under extreme pressure. Hawkman represents the institutional memory of heroism, the lessons learned from figures preceding the modern JSA roster, lessons Adam categorically rejects because they failed Kondak in the past. Dr. Fate's magic, beyond its spectacular presentation, symbolizes the weight of destiny and foresight. Brosnan's delivery often carries a melancholic undertone, suggesting that even with the power to see the future, the choices made remain agonizingly difficult. His mystical influence acts as a necessary check on Adam's rage, not through physical superiority, but through the suggestion of terrifying, unseen consequences should Adam allow his fury to fully consume him. This introduces a level of cosmic jeopardy that grounds the otherwise street-level, localized conflict between the two teams. The decision to pivot the final confrontation toward an externalized ancient entity, often a necessary device in these origin stories to ensure the protagonist ends up on the right side, inherently deflates the film's initial, bold premise. The initial tension was predicated on Black Adam being the primary threat, a walking embodiment of vigilante excess. When the script introduces a clear-cut, unambiguous evil to vanquish, Adam is suddenly repositioned from revolutionary anti-hero to powerful champion. This narrative maneuver, while tidying up the morality for broader consumption, leaves a lingering sense of missed opportunity. The film tantalizingly explored the potential for a morally gray powerhouse in the Dwayne Johnson mold, only to ultimately choose the path toward eventual integration into the established heroic framework, prioritizing franchise stability over thematic daring. The lingering emotion is therefore one of immense potential, barely touched, a powerful foundation laid for something darker that the climax gently paved over with conventional resolution. The repack presentation, while perhaps offering minor technical enhancements or preservation of an initial cut, ultimately cannot mask the core structural conservatism woven into the film's DNA. This conservatism is most evident in the handling of Teth Adams' character arc, as it relates to the broader expectations of a billion-dollar cinematic universe. Johnson's dedication to portraying Adam as an unstoppable force is absolute. Every movement, every stare is calculated to project an aura of ancient, almost divine retribution. Yet, the narrative consistently circles back to the necessity of repentance, or at least, alignment. This echoes a pattern seen in the cinematic journeys of figures like Magneto, or even early portrayals of Wolverine, where inherent anti-establishment fervor must be modulated to fit within a larger ensemble narrative structure, where collaboration is paramount. The very concept of Black Adam, a character whose primary motivation is historically rooted in violently overthrowing oppressors, demands a degree of moral ambiguity that the film seems unwilling to commit to fully, especially when positioned as the potential cornerstone for future ventures. The underlying emotional engine driving Adam, the grief over his son Ishmael, is the most successful element in humanizing the otherwise godlike figure. This pain is the bedrock upon which his rage is built, making his violence understandable, if not justifiable. When Adam lashes out, it is not mere cruelty, but a panicked reaction to the loss of the one connection grounding him in the mortal world. This vulnerability, glimpsed fleetingly through Johnson's intense gaze, suggests the potential for profound character drama that the ensuing large-scale battles often overshadow. The film presents the audience with a tragic figure wielding ultimate power, but then seems hesitant to let that tragedy dictate the final terms of engagement. The JSA's effectiveness as a unit is hampered by their narrative positioning as external ethical auditors rather than true equals. Hawkman remains the standout opposition because his own history suggests a similar struggle with past violence, making his adherence to the rules feel like a hard-won survival strategy rather than abstract idealism. Aldis Hodge plays this tension brilliantly. The look of profound exhaustion in his eyes whenever Adam unleashes his power suggests a man tired of cleaning up messes left by forces beyond conventional control. Cyclone and Atom Smasher, while visually distinct and energetic, are largely relegated to demonstrating the sheer scope of Adam's power differential. They serve as human-scale markers against which Adam's God-scale strength can be measured, a necessary but somewhat limiting role in a story trying to elevate its title character above the ensemble. In essence, Black Adam feels like a meticulously engineered proof of concept. It proves that Johnson can command the screen as a dark powerhouse, and it proves that the DC mythology can sustain a narrative centered on an avenging force from an oppressed land. However, in striving to be both a standalone spectacle and a foundational brick for future continuity, it sacrifices the uncompromising edge that made the character compelling in the comics for so long. The film resolves the immediate threat with dramatic flair, yet leaves the audience contemplating not the nature of Black Adam's justice, but rather the careful balancing act required to keep him marketable within a broader, family-friendly blockbuster ecosystem. The echo left behind is the sound of a cage door gently clicking shut on true narrative anarchy. The film's pacing, particularly in the second act, betrays a certain structural nervousness, oscillating between explosive confrontations and requisite exposition dumps designed to frame the JSA's involvement. This oscillation reflects the broader tension within the production itself. The desire to present an unchained, consequence-free force of nature, juxtaposed against the necessity of establishing ground rules for a shared cinematic landscape. Jean Collet-Serra, working with a canvas far grander than his previous intimate thrillers, navigates these demands with visual competence, but the emotional through-line occasionally suffers from the need to service multiple narrative masters: Johnson's persona, the established DC lore, and the required sequel setup. Adriana Tomaz's unwavering faith acts as a crucial emotional tether, preventing Adam's descent into pure villainy in the eyes of the viewer. Sarah Shahi portrays her conviction with a fierce, almost spiritual intensity. She represents the memory of what Kandak lost and the hope for what it might regain, making her character less a love interest and more the embodiment of Adam's original righteous cause. Her presence justifies the brutality. Adam is fighting for someone, not just against something. Without her steadfast belief, Adam risks collapsing into the one-note brute the JSA fears him to be. Conversely, the narrative decision to sideline the Justice Society once the true ancient threat emerges is telling. Their sophisticated, rules-based approach to heroism proves utterly inadequate against a foe that operates outside their established parameters, which inadvertently validates Adam's original, violent methodology. However, instead of allowing Adam to fully embrace this superiority and redefine the terms of engagement, the script engineers a clumsy alliance. Dr. Fate, the one member whose mystical background theoretically aligns with Adam's ancient origins, must temporarily set aside his own wisdom to facilitate this collaboration. Brosnan's command shifts from mystical guidance to tactical coordination, a move that diminishes the unique power center he represents. The lingering dissatisfaction often stems from the film's inability to truly commit to the ambiguity of its centerpiece. Dwayne Johnson brought the necessary gravitas and physical mass to sell the concept of a demigod corrupted by grief and power. Yet, the film ultimately functions as a very expensive, prolonged origin story that concludes with the protagonist signaling his readiness to become a team player. The catharsis promised by the anti-hero narrative, the acceptance that true change often requires shattering old structures, is ultimately replaced by a promise of future cooperative heroism. Black Adam is a spectacle of immense power held in check, a cinematic testament to the star's ability to command attention, yet one that pulls its thematic punches just when the audience is most invested in the ensuing chaos. The film's reliance on set pieces, while visually impressive, occasionally serves as a distraction from the more compelling internal conflicts brewing beneath the surface. The sheer kinetic force displayed by Johnson when embodying Black Adam is undeniable. The destruction wrought feels weighty, possessing a density that signifies genuine, untamed power, a stark contrast to the often weightless physics of other cinematic titans. This physicality is a direct reflection of Johnson's own career trajectory, a relentless, focused drive that demands the environment bend to his will. In Black Adam, this translates to Teth Adam's environment bending to his anger. Yet, these prolonged action sequences, particularly the citywide battles, sometimes dilute the intimacy of the moral quandaries facing the JSA. They are forced to react to an event rather than drive the philosophical debate. The exploration of Teth Adam's isolation is profound but too quickly overcome. He is a man resurrected centuries later, stripped of his son and his purpose, finding himself in a world that immediately fears him. This deep, existential loneliness should fuel a more sustained internal conflict, yet the screenplay pivots rapidly toward external threats. Sarah Shahi's Adriana serves as a necessary emotional anchor, but her role is ultimately one of affirmation rather than transformation. She confirms Adam's essential goodness rather than challenging him to forge a new moral path from the ashes of his tragedy. Her hope acts as a protective shield for the audience, insulating them from the sheer horror of what a truly unchained ancient immortal might inflict upon a perceived enemy. Aldis Hodge's Hawkman stands out precisely because he resists this easy reassurance. His commitment to the JSA's ethical code is rooted in survival, suggesting he has seen heroes fail when they become too enamored with their own righteous fury. His skepticism is the film's most mature element, acknowledging that power without stringent accountability quickly becomes tyranny, regardless of the initial justification. When he confronts Adam, it is not just a fight between two powerful beings, but a clash between two valid, yet irreconcilable philosophies on maintaining order in the face of chaos. The narrative's ultimate concession to conventional heroism is most jarring in the handling of Dr. Fate. Pierce Brosnan elevates the mysticism, giving Fate an air of weary responsibility, suggesting that seeing all possible timelines is a curse more than a gift. However, the script requires him to pull back from utilizing his full, reality-altering potential against Adam, adhering to an unspoken agreement that the good guys must fight fairly against the anti-hero, even when the anti-hero is demonstrably breaking every rule. This adherence to a specific, if internally inconsistent set of cinematic rules ensures that Black Adam, despite his rage, remains within the spectrum of redeemable protagonists, thus safeguarding the future profitability of the character without fully exploring the narrative goldmine of an actual, uncompromisingly dark deity walking the modern earth. The film achieves spectacle, but at the cost of thematic courage. The dynamic between the established heroes and the ancient usurper hinges on the very definition of legacy, an idea that permeates the careers of the actors involved. Dwayne Johnson carries the weight of his own self-made mythology, projecting an image of unassailable authority that mirrors the power Teth Adam wields. This personal brand translates into a performance where Adam is always positioned as the apex predator, even when momentarily subdued. Conversely, the JSA members, particularly Hawkman, embody legacies they must uphold or defend. Aldis Hodge's portrayal is steeped in a sense of duty inherited from generations of protectors, a contrast to Adam's power, which is bestowed by a magical source outside the mortal chain of command. This friction, inherited duty versus self-ordained authority, is the film's most intriguing intellectual sparring match, often communicated through charged glances rather than dialogue. The visual contrast employed by Coley Serra cleverly supports this thematic division. Black Adam's sequences are often bathed in deep shadows, harsh sunlight, or the reddish-gold hue of Kondak's dust, emphasizing raw, elemental force. The JSA, particularly in their headquarters or during their initial deployments, inhabit a cleaner, more sterile visual space, suggesting order, regulation, and the technology of modern heroism. When these two aesthetics collide, the visual language clearly signals an imbalance of power, not just in strength, but in fundamental worldview. The JSA operates under the purview of systems. Adam operates under the purview of raw historical grievance. Even the smaller character beats underscore this thematic divergence. Adam Smasher's youthful arrogance and eventual forced humility, while slightly cliché, serve to illustrate the scale shift required when dealing with an entity of Adam's magnitude. His attempts to adhere to JSA protocol seem quaint and ultimately ineffective, emphasizing that the old rules simply do not apply to this level of unleashed ancient might. This is where the film truly tantalizes, by showing the established system breaking down in the face of an uncompromising force. However, the narrative consistently pulls back from letting Adam fundamentally break those systems. The introduction of the ultimate villain, a creature seemingly designed solely to be punched through a mountain by the protagonist, functions as a narrative eraser. It wipes the slate clean of Adam's moral transgressions against the JSA, allowing him to absorb their victory without having to account for his own extremist methods. It is a necessary reset button for franchise building, ensuring that the anti-hero can transition smoothly into the realm of reluctant ally. The emotional satisfaction derived from watching Johnson unleash pure destructive fury is undeniable, but the intellectual satisfaction of watching a truly subversive character narrative unfold is systematically undermined by the requirements of the larger cinematic tapestry he is meant to weave into. The film leaves one feeling that the most interesting version of Black Adam, the one who might have genuinely challenged the status quo, was sidelined for the more palatable, team-ready champion. The emotional residue clinging to the narrative after the final clash is one of profound narrative compromise, a theme deeply embedded in how cinematic universes are constructed around powerful, disruptive figures. Black Adam's immense kinetic presence, the very thing Johnson spent years cultivating for this role, is ultimately leveraged not to overturn cinematic convention, but to reinforce it. His power is overwhelming, yes, but the application of that power is meticulously policed by the script's requirements for future continuity. This paradox, unbridled ancient rage channeled into franchise alignment, is the central tension that defines the film's legacy. Dr. Fate's eventual alliance, while visually spectacular, signifies the complete surrender of Adam's revolutionary potential. Brosnan, whose portrayal of Kent Nelson suggested a character weighed down by cosmic knowledge and the terrible responsibility of intervention, must ultimately lend his mystical authority to sanction Adam's brute force as necessary. This moment feels less like a genuine convergence of ideologies and more like a ceremonial passing of the torch, granting the ancient warrior legitimacy within the established pantheon. The film needed an undeniable external evil to justify this truce, effectively using the ancient foe to perform narrative housekeeping, clearing the moral slate for Adam's rehabilitation. The quiet dignity maintained by Aldis Hodge's Hawkman throughout the film is perhaps the most resonant aspect of its character work. He remains the immovable object against Adam's unstoppable force, representing the slow, painful evolution of moral conduct within a structured superhero environment. His refusal to simply accept Adam's actions, even in the face of a common enemy, keeps the thematic stakes high. Hodge channels a stoicism rooted in long service, a quality that suggests he has seen too many well-intentioned strongmen become tyrants. This caution acts as a constant, low-frequency hum of disapproval throughout the otherwise bombastic final act, a reminder of the price of unchecked power. Ultimately, Black Adam functions as a high-budget argument for why established superhero franchises are hesitant to fully embrace truly ambiguous protagonists. The dedication to Johnson's persona ensures Adam is always the focus, a charismatic central pillar, but the narrative architecture surrounding him is built to safely contain that charisma. The moments of genuine emotional breakthrough, Adam's silent recognition of his son's fate, the sheer desperation in Adriana's eyes, are potent because they ground the spectacle in human suffering. Yet, these moments are consistently overridden by the demands of the action climax, where thematic nuance is exchanged for overwhelming visual impact. The film succeeds as a showcase for its leading man and a statement of physical dominance, but it stops short of delivering the truly complex, morally corrosive anti-hero that the marketing and the character's history desperately hinted at. The film's final moments, setting the stage for a potential confrontation with an established DC figure, solidify the sense that Black Adam was less a standalone character study and more an elaborate, expensive prologue. The emotional payoff for Teth Adam, his quiet acceptance of the responsibility to protect Kahndaq, albeit within accepted heroic parameters, feels earned through sheer force of will, but underserved by the script's structural necessity to pull him back from the brink of genuine moral isolation. Johnson's performance remains rooted in an unyielding commitment to portraying a man who has endured millennia of suffering. This gravitas is what sells the premise, but it also dictates the narrative boundaries. When Adam finally embraces a protective role, it is a calculated move to integrate him, not a natural evolution of his character's deep-seated thirst for vengeance against historical injustice. The supporting JSA members function primarily as signifiers of morality. Cyclone and Atom Smasher serve as necessary casualties or pupils, their comparative weakness emphasizing Atom's scale. Their youth is a narrative tool to underscore the JSA's modern, perhaps overly cautious, approach compared to Atom's millennia-old pragmatism. They represent the future that Adam must, reluctantly, safeguard, a future that requires rules, even if those rules feel arbitrary to someone who witnessed his entire world burn due to the absence of enforcement. Even the mystical elements, channeled through Brosnan's Dr. Fate, end up serving the pragmatic demands of the plot, rather than exploring true cosmic horror or ambiguity. Fate sees the danger Adam represents, yet his visions ultimately guide him toward facilitating the alliance. It suggests that even the greatest foresight in the DC universe often defaults to maintaining the status quo rather than embracing radical, necessary change. A theme perhaps too volatile for a foundational blockbuster intended to launch a new cinematic tier. The film lands squarely on the side of controlled power, sacrificing the opportunity to explore what a truly chaotic, godlike Avenger might mean for an already fragile world order. The kinetic energy is never allowed to fully derail the machinery of the franchise. The lingering impression after witnessing the entirety of Black Adam is a deep acknowledgement of the sheer effort invested versus the thematic ground ultimately covered. Dwayne Johnson's commitment to the role is the film's engine. He embodies the physicality of a demigod forged in catastrophic loss, projecting an almost tectonic sense of suppressed energy. This isn't the polished charisma of his wrestling persona or action hero roles. It's a heavier, more burdened presence, suggesting millennia of silent endurance. This performance grounds the unbelievable premise, ensuring that even when the plot mechanics falter, the central figure possesses undeniable, imposing gravity. The film's structure, however, betrays an anxiety about fully embracing the anti-hero mantle. The narrative spends considerable time establishing the systemic oppression suffered by Kondak, making Adam's subsequent rampage feel like righteous, visceral catharsis. Yet, this catharsis is systematically curtailed. The introduction of the true, almost cartoonishly evil ancient foe serves as a convenient narrative pivot, allowing Adam to shed the mantle of potential antagonist